Welcome to Managing Public Use 3D Printers Part 4, Library Policies and Procedures, presented by Central Texas Library System, Incorporated. This video lesson is part of the 3D Labs at Your Library grant funded by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services through a grant to the Texas State Library and Archives Commission 2017. The lesson will cover access management, setting limits on printing, usage fees, and recommend some example policies at the end. One approach to managing access to the printer is to make it staff-only. This has some advantages, like reducing liability and simplifying the collection of payments. On the other hand, there also needs to be space behind the desk for both the printer and its supplies. There needs to be a procedure for submitting print requests, whether by web address, email, USB drive, or SD card. The patron should submit a form along with the file that includes the patron's contact information and some way to connect the patron to the file. A scheduling procedure needs to be in writing, so people know whether it is strictly first-come, first-serve, or subject to the most efficient way to fit the requests into the available time, or a combination of the two. Volunteers who are allowed to manage the printing will need both training and liability waivers, but also gain the educational benefits of hand-on experience. This approach does preclude the general public from this particular educational opportunity. The other option is to allow public access to the printer. While the space concerns are essentially the same, and the spools of filament still need to be secured, public access does allow more options for placement. Public access also requires training and liability waivers for the public. The waivers are typically signed at the end of the training and serve as certification. The training may be provided as a workshop or individually according to the library's demand, but the presentation needs to be standardized to ensure everyone gets the same information. Age restrictions need to be enforced for both safety and liability. Supplies for injuries need to be maintained despite the training and liability waivers. Practiced experts are notorious for becoming overconfident and hurting themselves. Public access also adds difficulty to collecting payments. The honor system is the most common solution, with results that depend on the community. Regardless of how access is managed, there are certain things that all libraries must account for. Patrons need to know whether long print jobs are allowed to run unattended overnight, or are limited to the library's open hours. Do people have to stay in the building until their print job finishes? 3D printers need posted warnings about intellectual property, just like photocopiers and printers. Fortunately, American Library Association has issued an updated version of their standard copyright notice that includes patents and other 3D printing issues. Another restriction to consider is objects that require a license to carry, like lockpicks and gun parts. Some libraries restrict objectionable imagery, but this has to be done carefully for First Amendment reasons. Stick to terms with specific legal meaning, like defamatory and obscene. The recommendations for the Children's Internet Protection Act, or CIPA filtering, generally apply. Policies by public libraries are prone to the same mistakes made by universities, so it helps to be aware of those as well. Cost-related issues also need to be worked out. A typical usage fee is 10 cents per gram. This amount covers the cost of filament use, filament waste, printer maintenance, and printer depreciation for most libraries. This is not a universal rule, though. Adjustments may be needed depending on the policies in place. Do users have to pay for failed prints? If so, do they prepay when the print job is submitted? Are refunds allowed? Is there an extra charge for particularly long print jobs? Whatever cost policy is in place, it should be reviewed every 6 months and adjusted if it is losing too much money or is interfering with the library's public access goals. Another financial issue is where the money goes. Does the money collected go back to the printer or into a general fund? Does the money collected carry weight during budget hearings? Some libraries only provide basic filament and require users to provide their own specialty filaments. Sometimes, the library's Friends group sells the specialty filaments that are appropriate for the library's printer. User-provided filament can get complicated when access is restricted to staff, so a waiver of liability for wasted filament and other problems is needed. Thank you for listening to this lesson on library policies and procedures. Links to the resources mentioned, as well as some example library policies, may be found in the script, which is also available. This is the last lesson in this series on managing public use 3D printers.